Have you ever felt like someone was watching you even when you were alone? Share your experiences in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the quietest places hold the darkest secrets. The first thing that struck me was how quiet it was that morning. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you expect on a ranch, but the heavy, unnatural stillness that feels wrong. The type that wraps around you, prickling your skin and making your breath catch. I stepped out of the house, mug of coffee in hand, the earthy scent of rain lingering in the air. The mud underfoot glistened, and as I made my way to check on the livestock, something stopped me dead in my tracks. Footprints. Not hoofprints from the animals or even the worn tread of my ranch boots. These were large human footprints, fresh and deliberate, pressed deep into the mud. They looped around the livestock pen in perfect, unsettling circles before veering off toward my front porch, then disappeared into the woods. For a moment, I just stared. A logical part of me whispered excuses. Maybe one of the ranch hands came by, or perhaps a hunter had wandered too far. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I found them again, new tracks, following the exact same path. Circling the pen, pausing at the porch, then vanishing into the woods like a ghost retreating to its lair. This time I followed them. The trail led me deep into the trees, farther than I'd been in years. Every step felt heavier, the dense canopy above muffling the world around me. The tracks ended abruptly at the road, a clean break, as if whoever made them vanished into thin air. That night I sat in my chair, staring at the window, every creak of the old house sending my heart into overdrive. I told myself it was nothing, that it would stop, but I knew better. Whoever or whatever it was, they weren't done. Then I heard it, a crunch of gravel near the tree line. I peered through the slats of the barn, my breath hitching as a figure emerged from the woods. They moved slowly, deliberately toward the livestock pen. The dim moonlight barely revealed their shape, a tall man dressed in something dark. Then from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a second figure. This one stayed at the edge of the woods, motionless, blending with the shadows like they were part of the forest itself. My grip tightened on the shotgun. I couldn't let them keep doing this, stalking my land, my home. Before I could second-guess myself, I fired 2 warning shots into the air. The explosion shattered the silence, echoing across the ranch. The figure by the pen froze, their heads snapping toward the woods. For a second, I thought they'd run. Instead, they fired back. A bullet slammed into the barn door, inches from where I crouched. Splinters flew, and another shot followed, grazing the wooden beam behind me. My pulse pounded in my ears as I realized this wasn't just trespassing. This was an ambush. I crawled toward the back of the barn where my truck was parked. My fingers trembled as I fumbled for my phone, whispering into the receiver as I dialed 911. "They're armed," I hissed. "Please send someone. Fast." The dispatcher promised help was on the way, but I knew out here in the middle of nowhere it wouldn't be quick enough. Minutes stretched like hours. The barn was pitch black except for slivers of moonlight. I stayed behind a stack of hay bales, ears straining for any sound. Then I heard it, the creak of the porch steps. They were at the house. Every horrible possibility raced through my mind. Were they trying to break in? Or worse, were they looking for me? My hands clenched around the shotgun, my body frozen in place. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The crunch of gravel returned, this time moving away. Peeking through the barn slats, I saw the figures retreating into the woods. One of them carried something, but in the dim light I couldn't tell what it was. 40 agonizing minutes later, flashing red and blue lights flooded the driveway. Relief washed over me as I stumbled out to meet the officers, recounting the night's events in hurried, shaky words. The search turned up what I already knew, the same footprints, scattered shell casings, and an air of unanswered questions. The officers guessed poachers or thieves, but it didn't add up. Why watch me for days before making a move? And what were they carrying when they left? The ranch feels different now. Even with the cameras and floodlights I installed, the woods never seem entirely empty. Every shadow feels alive. Every gust of wind sounds like footsteps. I've lived here long enough to know that ranch life is unpredictable. But the thought of those men, standing in my yard, firing at me without hesitation, it's a memory that refuses to fade. Some nights I catch myself staring out the window, my eyes fixed on the tree line, waiting, because deep down, I know they could come back. And next time I might not see them until it's too late. The moon hung low over the endless rows of corn, casting long, eerie shadows that danced in the faint breeze. The farm was silent except for the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. But the stillness was deceiving. Something or someone was out there. Farming has always been my life, a steady rhythm of sunrise and hard work. I've lived on this land for as long as I can remember, inheriting it from my father, who inherited it from his. There's a deep sense of pride that comes with working the same soil your ancestors did. But in 2016, that pride was replaced by something else, a creeping dread that still chills me to this day. It all began on a Tuesday morning. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the horizon in soft hues of gold and pink. I had Max, my loyal farm dog, by my side. Max was always alert, always vigilant, his sharp senses often catching things I'd miss. As we walked the perimeter of the field, his sudden low growl stopped me in my tracks. "Easy, boy," I muttered, patting his head. But Max wasn't having it. His ears were pinned back, and his nose twitched furiously. Then I saw it, a makeshift campsite near the edge of the field. At first it didn't look like much. A patch of flattened grass, a circle of stones that had been used for a fire pit. But as I got closer, unease settled in my chest. There was a crumpled, dirty blanket, a few empty cans of food, and footprints in the dirt. Large ones. The fire pit was cold, but the ashes were fresh, maybe a day or two old. The blanket was carefully folded, almost like whoever had been there planned to return. And those footprints, they didn't lead out to the road or into the woods. They led toward my house. Max barked, his deep, guttural tone telling me this wasn't just some drifter passing through. I followed the footprints, my stomach tightening with every step. They trailed across the field, through the tall grass, and stopped just short of my back porch. That's when I noticed the scratches on the doorframe. That night I locked every door and window, something I hadn't felt the need to do in years. Max stayed inside with me, his restless pacing mirroring my own unease. Sleep was elusive, and when Max started growling around midnight, I felt my pulse quicken. Grabbing a flashlight, I crept to the window. The yard was dark and still, but Max's growl deepened, his eyes fixed on the back porch. I didn't see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next morning, the campsite was different. The blanket was gone. Someone had returned during the night, confirming my worst fears, and it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, fresh footprints appeared around the house every morning. They always stopped at the same places, the back porch, the barn, and the kitchen window. I felt like I was being watched, as if someone was waiting for the right moment to make their move. Then, one night, Max's barking shattered the silence, pulling me from a restless sleep. It was 2 a.m., and his bark was frantic, panicked even. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, my hands trembling as I opened the back door. Before I could stop him, Max bolted into the darkness, his barks echoing through the night. "Max!" I shouted, but he was gone, tearing through the cornfield. My flashlight's beam caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure running through the tall stalks. They moved quickly, weaving through the rows like they knew the land better than I did. I didn't chase them. Instead, I called the police, my voice shaky as I described what had happened. When the officers arrived, Max returned, his tail wagging proudly. My relief was short-lived when I noticed his muzzle smeared with blood. "Is he hurt?" one of the officers asked, stepping closer. I shook my head. No, that's not his blood. The officers searched the cornfield, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. It didn't take long for them to find something. There's blood here, one officer radioed in. Fresh, but no body, no trail. Near the edge of the field, they found a knife and a coil of rope. The knife was sharp, the kind you'd use for hunting. The rope was thick and frayed, like it had seen use before. Looks like whoever this was had plans, one officer said grimly. I stared at Max, who wagged his tail as if he'd just saved the day. But the thought of what he might have done out there and who he might have stopped sent a chill down my spine. The police patrolled the area for a few weeks after that, but no arrests were made. I installed cameras, floodlights, and motion sensors around the house and barn. The footprints never returned, but the feeling of vulnerability hasn't left me. Out here, isolation can be comforting, but it can also be dangerous. I still wonder who they were and what they wanted. Were they just looking for a place to stay? Or did they have something far darker in mind? Sometimes, when the wind rustles through the cornfield at night, I can't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see someone lurking at the edge of the trees, and every time my grip tightens on the rifle by my bedside. Farming is hard work, but nothing prepares you for the kind of terror that walks on two legs. When Paul called me out of the blue, his voice carried an edge of unease, though he tried to mask it with casual conversation. He needed a favor, a week's worth of help watching over his farm while he attended a cattle fair. The timing seemed perfect for me. As a freelance horse trainer with a flexible schedule, the promise of cash, free lodging, and peaceful isolation was enticing. I'd always enjoyed visiting Paul's farm, with its rustic charm, rolling pastures, and the soothing company of friendly horses. But this time, something felt off, though I didn't realize it right away. The farmhouse was a two-story relic of another era, with its wraparound porch overlooking the open fields. It stood as a beacon of solitude amidst the vast rural expanse. Paul handed me a detailed list of chores: feed the horses, muck out the stalls, check the fences, and keep an eye on the house. Before leaving, he hesitated, opening a cabinet and pulling out a small handgun. "You might need this," he said, holding it out to me. The sight of it caught me off guard. "I've never handled a gun before, Paul." "I'll be fine without it," I said, brushing off his concern. He frowned, clearly uneasy. "All right, but if anything feels off, don't hesitate to call the cops." I shrugged it off, chalking up his worry to rural paranoia. What could possibly go wrong in a place like this? I was about to find out. On my second night at the farm, the air carried a chill that seemed heavier than usual. As I finished locking up the barn, I noticed something strange. The side gate to the horse pen was wide open. I distinctly remembered latching it earlier that day. A prickle of unease ran through me, but I dismissed it as my own forgetfulness. However, the following morning, I found something even more unsettling. A pile of hay near the barn had been disturbed. The grass beneath it was flattened, as though someone or something had been lying there. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, but the thought didn't bring much comfort. By the third night, the unease had grown into a gnawing discomfort. The farmhouse, so inviting during the day, felt oppressively quiet after dark. Around midnight, as I read in the living room, a faint creak broke the silence. It came from upstairs. At first I thought it might be the old house settling, but then I heard another creak, this one deliberate, as though someone was walking. "Jake?" I called out, my voice faltering. Grabbing a flashlight, I climbed the stairs cautiously. The hallway was empty, but one door at the far end was slightly ajar. My pulse quickened as I pushed it open. The room appeared untouched, save for the bed, which was unmade. That wasn't right. Jake had made the bed before leaving. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the closet door slightly open. Summoning every ounce of courage, I yanked it wide. It was empty, just clothes and boxes. The following morning, the barn door latch was broken, dangling loosely by a nail. The horses were jittery, their ears flicking at every sound. Daisy, usually the friendliest of the group, refused to leave her stall. I decided to call Paul. "Did you notice anything strange before you left?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "A couple of weeks ago I found footprints near the barn and some tools missing. That's why I asked you to stay. I thought having someone here would keep whoever it was away." His admission left me simmering. "And you didn't think to warn me?" "I didn't think it was serious," he muttered. That night I secured every door and window, even jamming a chair under the kitchen doorknob. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. Sometime after midnight, a loud thud jolted me awake. Groggy and disoriented, I sat up, listening. The sound came again, louder this time, a solid impact against the house. I got up and approached the window cautiously. What I saw froze me in place. A ladder, propped against the wall, reaching up to my bedroom window. But that wasn't the worst part. On the glass, faint but unmistakable, was a smudge, a face print. Someone had been watching me. Grabbing a flashlight, I scanned the yard below. The ladder was empty, but the sight of that smudge made my stomach churn. Determined to secure the house, I went downstairs, only to find the back door ajar. The chair I'd wedged under the knob was lying on its side. My heart pounded as I realized someone had been inside. Before I could react, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and too distinct to dismiss. They weren't coming from upstairs this time. They were inside the house. I ducked into the pantry, clutching a kitchen knife. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by low voices. There were two of them. From my hiding spot, I could hear them moving methodically, as if searching for something or someone. The voices became clearer, but I couldn't make out the words. Then the footsteps stopped, just outside the pantry door. My breath hitched as the door creaked slightly. And then, salvation. The distant wail of sirens broke the suffocating tension. The intruders panicked, their footsteps retreating rapidly. Seconds later, the front door slammed. When the police arrived, they found signs of forced entry and footprints leading into the woods. But the intruders were long gone. When Paul returned, guilt etched across his face. He admitted he'd suspected something was wrong, but hadn't thought it serious enough to warn me properly. "You used me as bait," I accused. "It wasn't like that," he said, but his words felt hollow. I left the farm that day, vowing never to return. Even now, the memory of that week lingers like a shadow. The farm, once a sanctuary of peace, had revealed its darker side, a place where the silence could swallow you whole. The farmhouse stood like a lonely sentinel in the vast sea of rolling fields. It looked like something out of a postcard. The big red barn, weathered by time, the quaint farmhouse with its chipping white paint, and the sprawling pasture that stretched as far as the eye could see. For me, it was more than just a charming image. It was a chance to escape. City life had worn me thin. The constant noise, the endless rush, and the grueling hours as a veterinary assistant had drained me. When I saw the ad for a live-in position on a farm outside Winterset, Iowa, I didn't think twice. The pay wasn't great, but the promise of tranquility, fresh air, and working with animals seemed like a dream come true. The couple who owned the farm, Harold and June, were in their 70s. They needed help with tasks that had become too physically demanding for them: cleaning stables, feeding livestock, and maintaining the property. They seemed kind, though their smiles carried a shadow of something unsaid, a weight that clung to them like an old memory. My room was upstairs, overlooking the pasture. The view was breathtaking, a masterpiece painted in shades of green and gold. The scent of hay and earth drifted through the open window, and for the first few days, I felt like I'd stumbled into paradise. but paradise has its secrets. On my fourth night, the air felt different, heavy, charged. I just finished checking on the animals and brushing my teeth. Wrapped in the cozy glow of my bedside lamp, I was reading when I felt it. A presence. It wasn't a noise or a shadow, but an unmistakable sensation that made my skin prickle. Someone or something was near. My eyes drifted to the window, drawn as if by an invisible force. And then I saw it. A face, pale, emotionless, and pressed against the glass. For a moment, my body refused to move. My mind grappled with what I was seeing, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the light, but those eyes, cold, unblinking, and empty, were unmistakably real. The face vanished before I could scream. I shot out of bed, my heart pounding, and yanked the curtain aside. Nothing. Just the yard bathed in moonlight and the silhouette of the barn. My breath came in shallow gasps as I scanned the darkness, but there was no movement, no sign of the intruder. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe my imagination was playing tricks on me. But the image of that face haunted me, lingering like a ghost in my thoughts. At breakfast, I hesitated before bringing it up. "Did either of you see anyone on the property last night?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Harold looked up from his coffee. "No, why?" I shrugged. "I thought I saw someone outside my window." June's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "Someone?" "It was probably nothing," I said quickly, regretting my words, "just shadows." Harold chuckled. "Out here? Not likely. Nobody comes this far without a reason." But June didn't laugh. Her expression softened into something unreadable, almost sad. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I went outside to the spot beneath my window. The ground was soft from a recent rain, and my stomach dropped when I saw them footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, leading from the edge of the woods to the base of the farmhouse. Larger than mine, too big to belong to Harold or June. My heart raced as I crouched down, running my fingers over the indentations in the mud. Someone had been there. The nights grew worse. It started with a faint rustling outside my window, like footsteps in the grass. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or an animal, but the noises grew louder, more deliberate, and always came at the same time, just after midnight. When I told Harold and June, they dismissed it with gentle smiles and well-meaning reassurances. "You're not used to the quiet," Harold said. "It can play tricks on you." But I wasn't imagining it. The second time I saw the face, it was in the kitchen. I was washing dishes late one night while Harold and June were already in bed. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. I glanced up, and there it was, staring at me through the kitchen window. I screamed, dropping the plate I was holding. The face disappeared instantly, but the fear didn't. My legs felt like jelly as I backed away, my hands trembling. Harold and June came rushing downstairs. "What happened?" June asked, her voice edged with panic. "It was there," I stammered. "The face, it was looking at me." Harold checked the yard, but as expected, he found nothing. "It's just your nerves," he said, though his voice sounded unsure. By now, I was locking my bedroom door every night, barricading myself with anything I could find. But none of it made me feel safe. On my final night, the footsteps returned, louder this time, circling the house like a predator stalking its prey. I sat up, clutching the flashlight I kept by my bed. Gathering every ounce of courage, I tiptoed to the window and peeked through the curtain. The yard was empty. But then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper coming from the woods. My breath hitched as I strained to hear the words, but they were too soft, too distant. And then, As if sensing my attention, they stopped. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I packed my things. I told Harold and June there was a family emergency and that I had to leave immediately. June pulled me aside as I was loading my car. "You're not the first, you know," she said quietly. "Others have left early too. They've all said the same thing, faces in the windows, noises at night." "Do you know what it is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head. "I don't want to know." As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even miles down the road, I felt its presence, like it was still out there, lurking in the shadows. I never went back to the farm, but some nights, when the wind whispers through the trees, I think of that face, pale and unblinking, and I wonder if it ever left.